for Ukraine!
Fighter jets for Ukraine!
Fighter jets for Ukraine!
Fighter jets for Ukraine!
Air defense 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 for Ukraine!
Now, it is truly a situation of the pot calling the kettle black when Putin is calling out the West for not keeping its word. When Russia has violated every agreement they've made with Ukraine. How can Ukraine make a peace treaty with Russia if every previous peace treaty, every previous guarantee has been violated by the Russians? It's impossible, my friends. It would be stupid to even attempt such a thing. But we will continue, because there's a lot more where that came from. Putin was on a roll that interview. He was on a roll with the idiocy and with the revisionist history. And that is what we're going to expose today. Putin continued saying that at 2008 the gates of NATO were open to Ukraine. That's not quite true. There were some negotiations between Ukraine and NATO. However, those negotiations ended up in nothing. Partially because of the fault of the West. The West was not particularly interested in letting Ukraine in, because the West wanted to play apologetics with Russia. The West wanted to use this politics of appeasement with Putin to try to make Putin friendly. An idiotic move. I'm sure we can see that in hindsight. But some individuals, unfortunately, still don't see it even now. And another interesting thing about 2008. What else has happened in 2008 that might have made the Ukrainians very uncomfortable? The invasion of Georgia. Of course. Putin invaded the Georgians whilst claiming that they were planning to invade Russia. Does anybody else feel a sense of deja vu in this situation? Small little Georgia, with a much smaller population, much smaller military, invading big Russia. The self-proclaimed world superpower. Doesn't sound very legit, does it? Well, my friends, because it's not. Abkhazia and South Ossetia were occupied by the Russian troops that remain there even now. That is why we stand with our Georgian brothers for their freedom and for ours. Putin continued into Ukrainian politics. He mentioned Viktor Yanukovych, or as we like to call him, Bandyukovich, the bandit, the crook, as somebody who won the election. Of course, Putin never mentions the fact that Yanukovych was found guilty of voter fraud. He never mentions that. He never mentions the fact that Yanukovych did exactly the same kind of stuff in the second election that he supposedly won. But of course, Putin would not mention it because he flooded Ukraine with bribes and with threats. It was the KGB that poisoned Yushchenko, who had good ideals at first, but was scared and backpedaled on almost everything. And of course, Putin never mentioned that it was because of Yanukovych's backpedaling on his promises to the Western Ukrainians, to the vast majority of Ukrainians, in fact, of getting closer relations with Europe, closer relations with the EU. He completely backpedaled it. Thank you very much, my friend. I think the umbrella is no longer necessary. He backpedaled on that, and that's exactly why we had the Maidan Revolution. Because people had enough. They had enough of these lies and these Russophiles in charge. And that is why Yanukovych was toppled. And Putin accepted him with open arms. Because as we all remember, Yanukovych did not go to Poland or to Moldova or to Hungary or to Slovakia or any other of our neighbors. He went to Russia. Because the Russians were the ones who were filling up his pockets. And he continued to fill up the pockets of all kinds of apologists right now. He has mentioned that Yanukovych did not use the police or his private police forces to kill Ukrainians. Now, for anybody who's not aware, we have a term in Ukraine. It's called Nebesna Sotnya, the Heavenly Hundred. Those were the people who died in Maidan, who were killed by Yanukovych's crooks, who he sent after them with intent to kill, to butcher, and to intimidate. Those 100 men and women are heroes of Ukraine. And that is what Putin will never accept. Because Putin will always lie, thank you very much, my friend. Putin will always lie on his personal behalf. That is what we want everybody to know. Putin admitted helping the separatists in his speech. Not completely directly, mind you. He didn't just say, oh yeah, we sent them weapons. He simply said that they could not just stand by and watch the poor people of Donbass getting killed by those evil Nazis. But my friends, the real Nazis in Ukraine was the Wagner group sent from Russia to attack, to destabilize, and to kill anybody who opposed them. Those were the real Nazis. The group that started with Dmitry Utkin, the famous neo-Nazi who fought in the Chechen wars. And yet, thank you very much. Well, times change, times change, my friends, and we need to adapt to those times. So I appreciate the help with the umbrellas. It would be difficult to juggle the umbrella with the microphone at the same time. I appreciate it. I appreciate it. I will continue. So Putin did admit to helping the separatists, although back in the day, for any of you, my friends, who might remember it, he pledged that there was no help that they were getting. And he even joked about it. Oh, maybe they got their weapons, their artillery in the local supermarket. It was stupid, really, a cringe joke. However, for Putin, it's beyond hilarious. And for all of his crooks, it's going to be funny also. Because they will laugh at anything that fool says. Putin said, we never agreed Ukraine would be in NATO. Now this is one of my favorite parts of this interview. Think about that for a second. We never agreed that Ukraine would be part of NATO. But if Ukraine is a sovereign state, then what say does Russia have over whether or not Ukraine is part of NATO? What say do they have over that? None. And yet, Putin does not see the hypocrisy in him saying that they were okay with Ukrainian sovereignty and at the same time directly infringing on that sovereignty with his demands. He does not see the problem in that. But we have to see it, my friends, because the problem exists and the problem will not be solved unless we work together to solve this problem at long last. Because the Russian terrorist regime is not stopping. Not without our help. And we will stop it for sure. Now Putin said later on at 53-minute mark, and keep in mind I'm making these mentions for any person who's curious enough to actually fact check whatever criticism I'm giving. I don't want to make this speech boring, my friends, but it's important for us to actually give exact and precise information. Unlike Putin, so that people know and so that people can look it up themselves. So that people are not fooled, because people deserve to know the truth. So that they can make an informed decision based on that truth. At the 53-minute mark in Putin's interview with Tucker Carlson, Putin said they wanted to solve it with military, implying Ukraine and the West. But my friends, Putin never mentions the fact that Ukraine had demilitarized the vast majority of their equipment, of the Soviet stocks that they had, all of their nuclear arsenal. So why would Ukraine want to solve it with military if not only they dismantled and sold away most of their weapons and most of their equipment, but also they gave their nuclear weapons to Russia? So what sense does that make? I give you my gun and then I declare war against you? Does that sound believable to anybody in their right mind? No, it does not. However, that did not stop Putin from continuing his idiotic rambling. Now Russia, as we all know, was the one who invaded Ukraine. But Putin continues to push this lie that supposedly Ukraine attacked them. Somehow, although Ukraine was a sovereign territory, although Ukraine never infringed on the Russian borders in those days, but Putin continues to claim that Ukraine was the first one who struck. Somehow, Although it was his troops, Russian troops and Wagner troops, with no insignia, which, by the way, is a violation of the Geneva Convention, just so you know. Troops need to have insignia. Without insignia, they invaded Ukraine and annexed those regions. Putin said, we did not start this war at 2022. Now, Putin said the same thing about 2014. Putin said the same thing about Georgia. Putin said the same thing about every war that Russia has started. Because Putin lies, and we need to understand that he lies. And these fools who claim that brave Tucker Carlson gave poor innocent Putin his word to speak are nothing more but idiots. Putin has the resources of a whole country at his disposal. Perhaps the country with the most natural resources in the world. Putin can speak. He has the power to speak, and nobody has the power to silence him. And Tucker Carlson? He's a mere shill, contributing to the propaganda machine that is the Russian terrorist regime. He said, we haven't achieved our aims yet. This was the very first truthful statement that Putin made in this whole interview. Because of course they have not achieved their aims, and they will not achieve them. But he left it open to interpretation, as if they would achieve it in the future. He mentioned denazification. He said that the Poles had provoked Hitler, and at the same time he kept claiming that his aim in Ukraine was denazification. So Putin plays both sides very clearly right now. On one hand, he says that the Nazis were provoked to attack Poland. On the other hand, he claims he has righteousness because he's killing those evil Nazis in Ukraine, although no serious and legit proof has been given of that. So what are we to trust? That Putin is for Nazis, or that Putin is against Nazis? The truth of the matter is, my friends, that Putin is a self-serving liar, and he will defend anybody who helps him achieve his genocidal goals. He never answered how he would influence the ideology of a country that he doesn't control. This was the only good question that Tucker Carlson has asked throughout the whole interview. He's asked Putin, how would you influence Ukraine if you don't have direct control of Ukraine? And every single time he repeated this question, if I'm not mistaken, he repeated it 3 times. Putin did not answer it a single of those times. He continued to deviate, he continued to switch the conversation elsewhere. He said, at the 1 hour and 6 minute mark, if you want to stop fighting, you need to stop supplying weapons. It will be over within a few weeks. Now once again, a very grim reality Putin is painting here. Just stop supplying the victim, the people who are defending themselves with the means to defend themselves, and the war will end. Because of course, after this war ends with a Russian victory, there will be a mass extermination of the Ukrainian people. Because Putin is the one who decides who are the Russians and who are the Nazis. And in his crooked mind, those are the 2 only definitions that exist. Russians and Nazis. And if the Nazis side with Russia and fight for Russia, Putin will never admit it. As he never claimed, he never admitted that the Wagner group is a neo-Nazi battalion. Putin said that Russia, in fact, will only invade Poland if they attack Russia. Once again, my friends, must I repeat it again? Does anybody see this as a bit of a deja vu situation? Putin has claimed this in the past. He's claimed that Georgia was preparing to attack Russia. He's claimed Ukraine was preparing to attack Russia. If Putin sees NATO as toothless, if Putin sees the Western world as useless and cowardly, he will attack, and he will claim that this was to stop them from attacking him. It has always happened this way. It will always happen the same way again and again until we stop them once and for all. He said, start respecting our country and its interests, implying Russia, of course. Now, it would be very funny if Hitler told the whole world, just give us all the Jews so we can kill them. Start respecting our country and our interests, and then we will start behaving ourselves. Would be very interesting if that happened, wouldn't it? Would the world truly give up every Jew on earth to Hitler, to kill them, just to appease him? Obviously not. I'm certain we will never get a person who will come here and say, yes, give Hitler all the Jews. We will never hear that. Because people are not that stupid. I like to think they're not that stupid, at least. But why is it that when it's Putin, people come to us and they say this exact same logic to us? Just give Putin more Ukrainian territories and he'll be appeased. And he will stop. Just respect Putin's whims and wishes. And this supposed culture and revisionist history that Putin is creating himself in his bedroom doesn't sound too great, does it now, my friends? And that is why we should not shill for Putin like Tucker Carlson did. Putin claimed that the percentage of Russian trade in dollars had dropped. Well, that's an interesting topic to talk about for Putin. Somebody who's cannibalizing the Russian economy and using it to fuel this war machine in a war that is useless for Russia above all. Russia has lost a lot in this war. Much less than Ukraine, but still a lot. And Russia will continue to lose a lot as long as Putin is in charge. I mean, of course Putin's trade with the West has diminished. His trade overall has diminished because of the sanctions. And the sanctions are working. The sanctions are crippling Russia right now. And that is the best case scenario. We need to make sure that the Russian terrorist regime knows that there are consequences for their actions. That is the only way to stop them. Putin was asked by Tucker, who claimed that Putin is a Christian leader, which is very funny. Putin, the ex-KGB agent, friends with Kirill, the ex-KGB agent himself, who is the leader of the Muscovite Patriarchate, of the Muscovite Orthodox Church. And then Putin claims, much later on in this interview, spoiler alert, that the evil Ukrainians are attacking the Orthodox Church. Is this Orthodox Church legitimate if it's controlled by an ex-KGB agent who weaponizes it for his own gain? Is this Orthodox Church legitimate if they put Putin on icons and show him off as a saint? No, my friends. The Muscovite Patriarchate is not legitimate. They're using idolatry of their own to push the cult of personality for Putin. And that is why they were stopped in Ukraine. And they should have been stopped long ago. But they were given freedom because Ukraine wanted to be a free country and Russia did not allow them to do that. Russians have been careful with other religions. Now this is interesting coming from Putin. It's a bold claim to make for somebody who has genocided the Chechens, a Muslim minority in Russia. It's a bold claim to make for somebody who is certainly aware of the Cherkassan genocide, a complete extermination of a Muslim minority in the Caucasus, done by the Russian Empire. But of course, don't let something as trivial as the truth get in the way of Putin and his personal ambitions, of his personal revisionist history. And yet we must know, my friends, we must know this so that we can move forward into a better future without trusting the Russian terrorist regime and without falling for the lies again and again. At 1 hour and 44-minute mark, Putin claimed that the patriotic sentiment is so strong in Russia. Well, it's interesting. All of those patriots, a whole million of them have fled mobilization when Putin has started it in Russia. A whole million of patriots have just decided that they have some very important business abroad that they just simply can't miss. And they simply had to leave their so-called motherland. Now, my friends, the truth of the matter is that the Russians themselves are not stupid, at least not the majority. They're simply completely depoliticized. And they still have this flawed idea that as long as they keep their heads down and keep offering their money to Putin, their livelihoods will be safe. This is a mistaken idea. Putin is already abusing his own people for his own personal gain, just to abuse the Ukrainian people who have done nothing to them. Putin claimed, "We won't attack anyone." And our culture is so human-oriented. This is what Putin said about Russia. I'm quoting Putin right now. Because it's important to say what this individual claims for his own people. We won't attack anyone. That's a funny thing to say in this supposedly special military operation that was started by the Russian terrorist regime. But of course, some fools and nutcases still like to believe that Russia did not start this war somehow. Their troops simply teleported themselves to Ukraine. And all of a sudden, they were there always. All of a sudden, Ukraine never existed. All of a sudden, the Ukrainians are a bunch of Nazis. This is what Putin likes people to believe in. But we must not fall for these lies and this deceit. Because Putin, as we've already noticed, has contradicted himself in his speech many times over. Putin claimed that Russia has treated the West with respect, and that the West should treat Russia with the same respect also. It's very funny that Putin also mentioned that one of the biggest dangers of our world is